Responder Friday. My name's Conrad Weaver. I'm your host for the show, and I'm so glad you have joined us on this Friday noon to talk about the issues of 911 dispatch and wellness. And in just a minute, we're going to be joined by Jim Marshall, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. But first of all, I want to encourage you to share this stream right now. Go ahead, whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube. Go ahead and share it with your friends and network and let them know to join us. And the conversation that we'll have with Jim talking about 911 dispatch and the challenges that gives 911 dispatchers with trauma and stress and all those things. And it's going to be a great, fascinating conversation. Uh, I also want to encourage you to sign up for our emails. If you go to ptsd911movie.com/freeview and you put your email address in there and your name, and I will send you a link to my previous movie called Heroin's Grip. It's a story about the opioid crisis and our community's response to it. You can watch that for absolutely free if you sign up for our emails. I would encourage you to do that. And you'll get regular emails, updates about these events that we're doing, and the like. So today I am joined by Jim Marshall. Jim is with the 911 Training Institute. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Conrad. It's a delight to be here with you for sure.
Well, it's you and I connected a few months ago, I think, and started talking about the movie project that I'm working on
Mhm.
and telling the story about our first responders and the traumas that they face and
Right.
the hope that is out there for and the help that is out there for our first responders. And in these days, it's even more so such an acute issue that
Mm.
and the stressors with COVID, with the things that are happening, along the lines of racism and all that, it just
Hmm.
adds stress to our first responder community. And I think these conversations are so important for us to have to bring to our audience the things that can help them, that can perhaps make a difference in their lives. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with a 911 dispatcher. She's retired now from that industry, but she's still dealing with a traumatic call that she had that happened 16 years ago.
Yep.
And she is still dealing with that. And so I think it's for the general public, I think me as a civilian, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't even
Hmm.
know about these things, especially with our dispatchers. And I know that the conversations that we'll have today, you'll be able to share much more clearly some of those issues that dispatchers are facing. So tell me a little bit about you, where you come from, and how you got into this business of helping 911 dispatch.
Well, sure. So, my story really begins with, and those who know me in the industry will have heard me say with great pride that I am the brother of a dispatcher, Conrad. So, the credentials that I have are secondary to how I ended up using those in 911. And that is that my sister, Debbie, the dispatcher, Debbie Achtenberg, she'll be watching this at some point. Way back in the 80s, she was a dispatcher before there was 911. There was no training. There were no protocols. There were no SOPs. There was nothing. They were just thrown in. And, the idea was any chick can answer a call, right? It's like the real response is happening out there. Just send the real people out to do the job. And not to be mocking field responders back then, but just literally no one had much sense at all about the psychological sophistication, demand of being 911 before it had those three numbers, the emergency number. But the point is that as my sister began doing this job, Conrad, she realized that she was in over her head because when the mother's child is not breathing and the mother's freaking out, guess what? She is the very first responder, not the person who will be sent. Often it's too late by the time the field responders get there. Well, I did my first sit along when I was in my first year of just finishing my first year of graduate school in clinical psych with my sister in her small township police department in one little room. It was a dark cave, no walls, no walls, or definitely walls, no windows. Uh, and I sat and watched her go from taking a couple calls, which I would call ASCs, apparently stupid calls. Now we say apparently because we have to watch out for the demon of judgment, which can grab us by the neck and choke us to death, right? So when I was like, so this is it, this is the gig, because I was so proud of my sister. She's like in this police department. And I really underestimated because the two ASCs came in first. And then, boom, there's this hot domestic violence call, Conrad. And I watched my sister lean forward. Now, she'd been doing this a couple of years. She's self taught how to manage a domestic violence call. She was dealing with a woman whose life was probably actually in quite serious danger. She de escalated this woman. She asked all the right questions somehow, or many of the right questions, and was able to, I could tell, be concerned not only about the person on scene, but the field responders who would end up there. And within about 4 minutes, when these officers rolled on scene, I'm pretty sure it was completely different than it was when she took that call hot and fresh in her phone, which is leaned on the side of her ear. And so I became a student of 911 as I was a student of psychology, and I was blown away by what my sister was doing. But as the years went on, and this is merely my brief story, this is in the Resent Non-Professional because I felt like it was so important in the introduction. But as the years went on, I was thrown into the deep end of my own pool. And I was dealing with people in psychiatric units where we were trying to evaluate them. Psychiatrists were sending me as a mental health professional. I'm a master's level psychologist in Michigan. And my job full time was to do the psychological evaluations to diagnose what's going on with these people because they keep coming into the hospital at risk of suicide, psychosis, etc., profound depression. And we're buffing them up, giving some meds to them, sending them back out, and then they're back in a week or two later. Is this making sense so far, Conrad?
Yeah, go ahead. Keep on going. This is fascinating stuff for me.
All right, great. It's good.
And
It's fun.
I have a degree in psychology from way back, so all this stuff is interesting to me anyway.
Okay, all right. Well, I hope it is for those of you who don't have that degree. But you know what I found is that 911, you got to be wicked smart to be 911. You know, as our East Coast dispatchers would say, how many people does it take to actually filter from all those applications one who can sit the console and make it through your training? So anything I've learned in psychology, 911 can learn. I've just been drinking from a different well than them. Now, over many years, we've brought this together. We drink together, we teach each other. But so back to the story, the point simply is that I realized as I was thrown into the deep end of this pool that when I was doing diagnostics, doing all these tests, intellectual testing, personality testing, subjective, objective, blah, 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 all that stuff, I discovered that there was this boatload of trauma inside people that had not been acknowledged, not been recognized. When I helped them feel a little bit safe, and it wasn't just about me mechanistically diagnosing them, they opened up and began talking from their soul about where they had been in their lives. And the trauma was driving you guys, probably activating the genetics of these mental illnesses, right? So it's okay. The label was bipolar disorder, but the question is, what role did the trauma have in activating it and in complicating the treatment of it? And so I became a student of PTSD as I was a young clinician. Over the years, my sister and I continued having these conversations about her calls, her callers, and my clients, and realized, my land, we are helping the same people, sometimes in the same kinds of moments. And often I was on the phone for hours with clients who were in the middle of no place, perhaps making an attempt and trying to help them survive. I was helping with 911 to try to find them when there was no way to locate otherwise. And so my sister and I, over time, Conrad, realized that we were not only related by our blood, but we were as brother and sister, but by our professions. We really were doing such complementary work that was interdependent. Psychology in the moments of crisis depends on 911, and 911 needs some psychology to help them as well. And so my story is this. My sister was asked to begin teaching at a college dispatch within a police academy, and she said no. No, we're going to start a dispatch academy. How's that for an idea? Because this is a profession too. And they were like, okay, we don't know how to do it, but if you do, fine. So she did. And she brought in stress management for 911. Well, you know what? It was really stress management for police, for law enforcement. It did not really apply to 911. So she said to me, you're going to create stress management training for my people. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, why not? Why wouldn't you do that? And I said, because I'm not going to go into the classroom like Mr. Psychobabble Woohoo, who knows everything about psychology, when I've never even sat the console. That is so rude. She said, no, I'll tell you what's rude, brother, is when your sister asks for help and you refuse to give it. You're going to train my people or I'm going to break your arms.
Was
She
she
did
your
not.
older sister?
Yeah, you picked that up.
Yeah.
Exactly. At which point, even though I don't think there was really a bodily threat there, she was serious because she had lived experience of what it was like to not be able to do first responder assistance to the mother and to the baby not breathing. She knew what it was like to go through the psychological trauma of feeling helpless when you can only do so much. In truth, the dispatcher is not helpless unless they aren't trained to do what is required. Back in those days, they weren't.
And
So,
how,
yeah,
and even some of the dispatchers I've talked to recently have said that, they were brought into the room and showed how to operate the equipment, and that's about all the training they got.
right,
And because back, 20 years ago, and maybe even some places today, they're considered just secretaries.
right.
They're not just secretaries, they are first responders. They are the first responders, right?
That's it.
And I think that, and I'm sure in many agencies today, the training is much more advanced. Um, but have
Oh,
you
yeah.
seen that around the country where there are agencies where the training is not where it needs to be?
Oh, most certainly. And our dispatchers who are in those agencies would be the first to say, I don't feel ready to do what I'm expected to do. Now, the good news is that more and more states have training standards. The quality of training, both in duration and quality, has really, really improved in most places. But in the area of their own resilience, their own well being in the face of traumatic stress, along with the apparently stupid calls, which produce stress of its own, acute stress that may not be at the traumatic level, there's not enough training that is really evidence based, that is really designed for the dispatchers. And that's why we started the Training Institute. Not to make that a plug, but that's just the reality. And then there needs to be much more training on how to handle calls involving suicide and mental illness, because when dispatchers are not trained, or I should say properly trained, unfortunately, there's been equipping that's been inaccurate in terms of how they should relate to people that has not been helpful. But the point is, when they don't feel prepared to help these people in real time, their anxiety goes up, their brain gets hijacked by stress hormones. They are not able to think as creatively and with all the intelligence, all those IQ points they usually have. They get a drop in the IQ point, at least accessibility to it. And then they carry home much, much more distress about that, which then accumulates over time. So having training to have mastery of call types involving suicide, mental illness, along with the other difficult call types, is essential, along with core resilience training, training in a mindset and a skill set to handle the calls. So, at any rate,
Yeah, so just for those that are listening, if you want to make a comment, please comment in whether you're watching on YouTube or watching on Facebook. You can put a comment below, and I can see those comments, and we can share those. If you have a question for Jim Marshall, please put that in the comments, and we will address those questions as we can moving forward. Jim,
mhm.
what have you seen in dispatchers? Have Has there been an improvement over the years, just in dispatcher wellness? I mean,
Mhm.
how are they doing out there?
Well, it's actually a great question and a very complex question. We need to follow the data. And on this, right now, I'm going to channel my inner Michelle Lilly. Michelle Lilly is one of the other people on your advisory board for the film. And I just have to say, I'm going to hijack this for a minute, Conrad. I know that you're the interviewer, but I want to say thank you as the brother of a dispatcher and as a adopted member of the 911 family, for investing in doing the film that you're going to be producing here. Because you and I had joked when I first met, will Hollywood ever get it right about what 911 is and who they really are, what the demands that are placed on them? So, because the investment that you're making and gathering together phenomenal people to help educate you as the producer of this and director is really a statement about realizing that the telecommunicator truly is the very first responder. And so, to your question of how are they doing out there, right? It's complex. And I said I was going to channel Michelle Lilly because she's done some of the best research we have in understanding where 911 has been at in terms of their well-being, their mental health, and what role their work as a telecommunicator may have in their well-being. And in her study in 2015 was really a kind of watershed, identified that 24.6% of telecommunicators using criteria from screening tools for civilians was at about 24%. It was between 17 and 24.6%. Now, that's very high. That's comparable to any of our other responders, most likely, and our returning military. That was quite shocking to many people. It wasn't shocking to me. It wasn't shocking to dispatchers, though, who live the life.
So say that again. So
Yeah.
24%. are dealing with trauma?
At the time of her study, not just dealing with trauma, but it's a good question. At the time of her study, of the 808 people who were in the study, of all age ranges and experience levels, 24.6% of them met the criteria for post traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
Okay. Now, that was on a range. If you use military cutoff scores on the screening tools, it was about 17%. But you shouldn't use military because they're civilian, right? Even if they're sworn, they fit more of the criteria for civilian. The point is that if you have PTSD, that doesn't mean you're having a bad day and you've got some anxiety. That means there's there's a cluster of things in terms of intrusive recollection of the trauma through nightmares, dreams, flashbacks, a sense of feeling that it's happening again. And then there's an activation of natural survival to avoid, and avoiding in many different forms, to shut it off, to not feel it, to not try not to remember it. But then there's also the left with the residuals of the traumatic experience of hypervigilance, always scanning, startle reflex where it easily jumpy, and irritability, fatigue. Fatigue is not a specific criteria, but it's definitely the cumulative effect of PTSD. And then there's a higher susceptibility, of course, to clinical depression and to suicidality. That's what she found. Now, to your question though of how are they doing out there, I want to point out that we can't prove this, but we don't know what percentage of people in Michelle's study, though it was nationwide, had gone through evidence-based resilience training, had been prepared for what they were dealing with training on call mastery. We don't know how many of them have peer support programs. I believe that dispatchers are beginning overall. I think we're going to see a decrease, if all other factors are the same, a decrease in PTSD as we realize, as through your movie and through all the other work we're doing in the industry, a decrease in PTSD because the more prepared people are. Look, Conrad, are you still there? Are you with me? There he is.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So look, if demand is here, right? If demand is right here and your resources are here, there's going to be more risk of PTSD along with chronic stress response, along with compassion fatigue and other things. The more the resources meet the demand, the more protected the people are. It's like no Kevlar, Kevlar.
Mm-hmm.
Thickness of Kevlar, quality of Kevlar, Kevlar.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're trying to do, is equip our 911 telecommunicators through the work we're doing in the industry.
What are agencies doing to equip their 911 dispatchers?
There's a huge variety of levels of involvement in proactively, systematically helping their folks. Most all of our directors care about their people, but the awareness they have of the PTSD, of the compassion fatigue, the clinical depression, which by the way was also in Dr. Lilly's study at 24% of that sample of 808 people. That's mind blowing. These are 3 to 5 times higher than the general public's incident rate.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they doing out there? Uh, we have always a bell-shaped curve, right? You've got folks who are doing nothing. You've got some who are doing something, and that's most all are doing something in the middle of the bell-shaped curve. And then you've got some on this side that are doing everything they possibly can and that's available to them. So we have peer support programs being developed by comm centers and with other comm centers. We have more access to critical incident stress management, like debriefings, which can be good if they're done well. It can be a problem if they're not. We have more recognition of the need for mental health provision and employee assistance programs. And at the national level, in 2013, the National Emergency Number Association developed a standard on acute traumatic and chronic stress management. We're right now in the process of rewriting that and building out more resources as volunteer members of the National Emergency Number Association, so that more of the peer support, evidence-based training, employee assistance programs, peer support. The document says all 911 centers shall have these comprehensive resilience wellness programs. So there's a lot happening. It's moving along now, and it's kind of like a fire. It takes a long time, maybe, and then it, yeah.
So what are some things that 911 dispatchers should do? Say perhaps their agency isn't on top of things and perhaps they're struggling. they're going through, they're having nightmares, they're having trouble,
Mm,
sleeping, they're, maybe looking, self-medicating. What are some things that
mm.
a dispatcher or someone can do when they recognize that, hey, I probably need to talk to somebody?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things they can do. The first thing is to make the short list. Who do I trust that I can speak to among my 911 peers and my family members? That's the first thing, because the silence and the being alone in it is what makes it all worse. The second thing is to choose to connect with those people, to say, I'm struggling and here's how I'm struggling. But let me just say, Conrad, for many of our 911 pros, before they get there, they need to recognize that the way they've dealt with their own hearts, their own emotion, for most of them, if we were to call it an emotional code, what they believe they should do with their emotion, with their distress, sorrow, sadness, fear, has been to suck it up, because that was the traditional training among our responders. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And you're going to hear that more. We have to move away from being a culture that just sucks it up to being able to be a culture where we come together and we it's not like we have to feel everything all the time, but we have to recognize that if we dehumanize ourselves, it eats us alive on the inside. So acknowledging pain, distress, that this is normal. That PTSD was understandable. It is understandable. It doesn't make you a less than. So do not judge yourself. Cease the judging. Acknowledge that you have pain, that it's okay to get the help that you need, and go and talk to the people that you need. Now, then the question is, what are the family members and or the peers who are willing to come alongside that one who's struggling? What do we do now? Right. And this is where we need to reach out for evidence-based treatment. It's a psychobabble word, but we need treatment that's been proven effective for healing PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, Conrad, let me make this a sample of one. I don't know, for your viewers, if we could put out a little question right now, and I won't give the answer right away. All right. So,
Okay.
okay, guys, if we do the poll, and Conrad, you can hold back your vote on this, but I don't know if you can see my arms here, but so we'll say, here's choice A over here. The statement would be, if I were to send you to a therapist for treatment of PTSD, would it be because I believe A, you can heal PTSD, meaning resolve the flashbacks, the shutdown, the hypervigilance, all that stuff, right? Or is it B, because I believe that you need to learn how to manage the symptoms? You need to learn how to cope and manage symptoms. So, folks, is it A, do you believe, can you heal PTSD? Or B, do you just learn to manage the symptoms so that you can cope and function in life?
So if you're watching, go ahead and put a comment below, and we'll see what people have said. So I think I know the answer, but I'll hold back to see what other people are answering.
Yeah,
I think in general, I think people would say you have to learn to manage it.
yeah,
That it's always going to be there.
yeah,
Um, and that's, I think was that B? Yeah, that was B. Yeah, people
yep.
are responding B.
There you
Um,
go.
yeah, a lot
There
of
you
people
go.
responding B.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when I've been speaking in sessions, I remember the first time I was brought into well, not one of the first time at an EMS conference. So I was with paramedics, medics, and EMTs, and I asked a room of about 500 or 600 people the same question, and virtually every hand but a couple said, "You can't heal it. You just have to learn to manage the symptoms." And I said, well, guess what? Is it any wonder then that a survey of our EMS pros found that 38% of them had seriously considered suicide and 6.6% had attempted suicide? This is
Mm-hmm.
multiples times our national public rate, right? So, but it's understandable, because if they don't believe you can heal PTSD, well, then where's the hope? You're screwed,
Right. Right.
right? The good news is you can resolve those symptoms. Now, in the meantime, as you're getting treatment, you do want to learn how to manage the symptoms, and that's good coping skills. We teach people as clinicians how to manage distress and think differently and shift your mindset, etc. But you can heal permanently the flashbacks, the memories, the horrible nightmares, the hypervigilance, and that stuff. You'll always have some hypervigilance because you're a responder. But so, to your question, they need to get the evidence-based treatment. And one of those is called EMDR. Those who know me have heard me talk about it for years. It looks like, oh, you're shaking your head. What?
Mm-hmm.
You know about EMDR?
I know about EMDR. Yep. I've talked
Aha.
to several practitioners and I've talked to people who have actually experienced it and gone through EMDR. In fact, I talked to one dispatcher in California who is going through it right now, and she said that she goes in maybe once a month. Well, now during COVID, it's more difficult, but
Yeah,
she
teletherapy, they
she's
can do it. Yeah.
definitely it's been a huge help for her.
Yeah.
And she said, and I don't understand it all, but I know enough that it's something that people should definitely look into.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And as you choose during the broadcast here, I know you've got a lot to handle technically as we're having this great conversation. But if you choose for us to try to find a therapist, we can go and I'll make you the 911 pro and have you go online and we'll walk through the steps with you,
and we
just
can
like
do
I
that.
do with people all over the place.
I've got the Nina website ready to go. So if
No kidding.
we can do that whenever you're ready.
Okay, that's great. Well, and while we're talking too, next time you jump off the screen and you make it all my work to do the talking here, you can also type in EMDRIA. Folks at home can do that as well. Emdria, EMDRIA.org, and that'll be the site we go to specifically to find the EMDR therapist.
Let me just put that in a little slide down below here. Let me see if I can add it.
That's great.
So go ahead and keep talking, and I'm going to let you. So, what are some other modalities that people have used and found success in those
Yeah.
to get help with their PTSD?
Well, so the treatments you want to use for PTSD are those that are evidence based, and I'll say that those that have the strongest support and evidence, SIPUR,
Mm-hmm.
are EMDR, and then another treatment of cognitive reprocessing therapy. And then there's another that's like systematic desensitization. It goes by other terms as well. But the point is, you want to get to the treatment that has been shown to be effective for the treatment of PTSD. For many years, I used EMDR as a clinician. I was trained in 1990 by Francine Shapiro, who was the originator of that treatment method. And I have probably done about 10,000 hours of EMDR. I don't keep doing things that don't work. I do things that my clients tell me are very helpful to them. And the evidence base has shown over the years that EMDR is very effective. So I would really encourage people to explore that. You'll find on my website that I've got a page that's all about EMDR and a link to other videos that you can watch and other information, as well as all the research. And that brings you then to emdria.org. But I would say too, and we can come back to this if you want, depending on where you want to roll, Conrad, but
Mm-hmm.
peer support, in my view, is at the center of the well-being of our dispatchers. If they're going to do better with the stress they're under, those unique stressors of 911, than we have in the past, it's going to be because we are systematically creating foundational support in the comm center that's there 24/7, 365. And no one gets it.
Last week we had Brad Shepard on talking
Yeah.
about peer support among police and fire. Is peer support a thing with 911 dispatch?
It's becoming a thing with 911. There are some pockets, communities where going way back, 911 was incorporated into like the sheriff department's peer support team in some places in California. Ryan Dedman, my outreach director from California, he'll tell you but really in terms of 911 having its own peer support that's designed from the bottom up for 911 and for those who do this work. Very little has been out there in the past. That's why we put it in the 2013 NINA standard on acute traumatic and chronic stress. That's why this time we have a team of people who are building out. Pamela Poca from Kansas City is one of our leaders in building peer support. And we at the Training Institute have built a model. We did a national pilot and with Gary Bell, who's our incoming NINA president, and his neighbor, who is from just down the road, John DeYoung from Madison, Wisconsin. And then from there, we've been building out more peer support programs around the country. And this is becoming a thing, and it has to be. It's really literally like oxygen to a diver. What do you do without a regulator? What do you do without the tanks on your back? how long do you expect to stay underwater?
Hmm.
So it's at the center of everything that needs to happen.
How about those folks who are from, smaller agencies that maybe just have, a couple people who work the call center?
That is a really good question, because models can be developed in such a way that they can only be adopted by the big centers with a bazillion people in there. No. So what we're doing, for example, I'm from Michigan, and we've been building out uh, a network of peer support teams, right? So each of the small comm centers might only have 2 or 4 people on a peer support team, depending how small it is. But then other comm centers in that area of the state collectively can support each other, and it makes it more feasible. In Georgia, Melissa Alterio, one of our great 911 pros and leaders out there, who's totally got her people's back. She's totally there for them. She's a leader in building out, implementing peer support. She's one of our partners with the Training Institute, and she has created, along with her peers, uh, Terry Connell, uh, along with other Georgia centers, a network, a Georgia peer support network, 911 peer support network. So it's happening. It's building out, and it's very, very encouraging, because when it comes right down to it, it's not just I need to get a little thing off my chest. Those little things can add up along with the big things, the worst calls. We really need to help save lives, not just help
Hmm.
have better days. And this is connected.
So, in moving forward, so if someone, like we said earlier, is struggling, um, where can they find help?
Okay. So the first thing is, if you have a peer support program, connect up with them, and they will help walk you to, and sometimes literally go with you to the first session. They'll help you find a therapist. At least the programs that we're developing, the peer supporters know who the evidence-based treatment folks are in the area, who does EMDR, and gets them there. If they don't have that, most all of our programs have employee assistance programs, EAPs. This is a benefit that's paid for you, and not that you should expect them to provide the treatment for PTSD. Go to them, though, to say, I need you to get me to an EMDR therapist or a therapist qualified to treat PTSD. Now, write down the phrase EBT, evidence based treatment. They should simply be able to give, literally, hey, I need EBT for PTSD.
Hmm.
EBT for PTSD, and you could add ASAP. That professional should be able to bridge them to the care they need. Having said that, Conrad, if somebody doesn't know where to start, or they're kind of shut down, if they're in an emergent situation, I really encourage them to reach out to either NSPL, and we could bring that up on the screen. I think it's good to do this in real time while we're even
Sure,
having this
sure.
broadcast.
Do you want me to go to the Nina website?
For this case, just type in NSPL. You'll
NSPL.
see on your browser NSPL. It'll bring up a number, a toll-free number, and then we can flash that up on the screen. And
That's the
now,
National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
bingo.
Okay.
There you go. They
I
are
will.
they are working with Nina. We're working on another standard right now, but there's the number, folks, right there. It's the 800-273-8255. Now, Conrad, here's the thing. Uh, there are plenty of our 911 folks who don't want to call a hotline because they work locally with the hotline. Some of them have great experiences, some not so great. But there's a second alternative. If they're not quickly going to call that, and that would be called the crisis text line. Actually, I'm texting 741-741, and then just entering in the message, help. 741-741 is crisis text line. It's help. It's completely confidential, just like the NSPL hotline is. And the reason I give you CTL2 is because there's always a master's level person looking over the shoulder of those who take those texts for crisis text line. And I really like that. If there's somebody who's struggling with immediate risk, they can connect them and get the guidance of somebody whose master's prepared immediately.
Hmm. And are there other resources then that, so if I'm at the point where I'm not in immediate risk, but I'm struggling and I realize that, I've raised my hand and said, okay, I need to get some help.
Yeah.
Where can I find someone? And is it important to find a therapist who understands
Mm-hmm.
dispatchers?
So yes, and I address this again in the book because we have to, and there's a non-professional because a lot of our employee assistance programs, quite frankly, were not selected by the county because they understand our responders. They were selected because they could provide generally good services at a price point that was doable for the county or the city or the state. But what's necessary is to check with the EAP and ask, what experience do you have providing counseling to our dispatchers? Likewise, when we call a contact a therapist in the community, if we're dialing cold or exploring on our own, to be able to ask, what experience do you have? So there does need to be an ability. If they don't have experience, though, there has to be a comfort level with working with a responder. If you're in a rural area, you don't have a lot of choices, um,
Mhm.
and that's really a feel on the part of the dispatcher. But we're trying to educate therapists too to understand 911. And on the website at the Training Institute, if you go to 911training.net, and maybe we could do that next if you want, because there's a resources page there. And on that resources page, you'll see that we give you the questions that you can ask a therapist. Yep, go to resources.
And for some reason, my screen is acting kind of strange. It's cutting off part of it, but
Okay, yep,
so
there
we'll
you
click
go.
over here on resources.
Yeah, there you go. And then EAPs,
It,
drop down a little bit further. There you go, up one. There you are. Great. So there's just a note there about EAPs. But then if you go back to resources, the resources tab, you go to seeking personal help. Bingo. And I like, Conrad, that we're doing this in real time with your viewers so they can see how to navigate this as well. So you can see I've written an article there about PTSD and that you can heal it. And as you scroll down, you'll see the further down the screen you get, there's also that information about who to reach out to for help in detail.
mhm.
And then if you're ready for relief, seeking out clinicians. Down a little bit further, you'll see I list some questions. And folks, you'll see those on the page. Just notice that there's a small group of questions to ask. I encourage you to just take a look at those. Any clinician worth their salt should be willing to take 5 minutes with you on the phone, not for free therapy, but for you to vet them. You have the right to vet them, and they need to be comfortable with that. I've just given you an example of questions you can ask.
Hmm.
Having said that, Conrad, we have dispatchers that are just like been there, done that. They don't feel good about the help they've gotten. They feel like the person, to your point, didn't get it. In which case, I would say, hey, you guys, email me, and I'll try to help personally identify along with you, as if Conrad and I were together, but without being live with cameras and all
Right.
that. But we would together go online and we would find somebody. In many of our communities, we already have identified people. So, but thank you for taking time for our guests to ask this.
Sure. So I have a question here from earlier
Yeah.
that someone asked, and the question was here. I'll put it up on the screen, see if it'll show that. What is the employment longevity of the 24%? Do you know what
Mm.
in general how long are dispatchers working, but specifically with that 24%? You know how long
Yeah.
they'll be
So,
working.
so if I recall the statistics correctly, the average years of experience in that population of 808 people who were in the group of the 24% with PTSD, their average overall average years of employment was 12.49 or something like that. But the PTSD was there for people from early and from those who were late in the profession.
Hmm.
So it spanned the full width. Um, so, let me say this. I'd invite that person to say a little bit more about what makes them ask, as long as they don't feel like they're getting too personal or, busting somebody's chops. But it's a great question. Let me say this. Your longevity is going to be far longer staying in the career with PTSD if you know the help that's available and you have the support that you need.
Hmm.
If you're sucking it up, trying the old school thing, all you have is like a little self medicating and just gutting it out. Yeah, right. You may last long, but you're going to be a shell of your former self. We've got dispatchers who've been in a situation. So I just want to say, if you want to last longer, get the help that we've been talking about here. if you've already hit the wall and you're past that point. I've had dispatchers, Conrad, with 20 plus years that have come up to me during training and private moments and just said, dude, look at me. I was dispatcher of the year in 2016, and now I'm getting written up more than anybody in my shift.
Mm,
I didn't realize that it was compassion fatigue. I didn't realize it was PTSD. Now what do I do?
mm.
The good news is we can guide them and get their careers back and get their lives back.
I mean, imagine what our world would be like when
Hmm.
our first responders are healthy and are
Hmm.
and feel it totally natural to raise their hand and say, "I need help."
Right.
I mean, what would our world be? I mean, just as a
Hmm.
population in general, we're reluctant to raise our hand when we need help. And I think that's why we see a lot of alcoholism, we see
Hmm.
drug abuse, we see a lot of, people have pain in so many areas. I mean, my
Yeah.
previous film, about heroin use,
Yes.
that use of heroin and those kind of drugs are there to mask the pain that's going on in their life.
Yeah.
And I think so many times we as a culture are reluctant to raise our hand and say, "Hey, can someone help me and help me walk through this?" And if we can change that, if we can change that stigma in all of us, but
Hmm.
especially, right now with our first responders and our dispatchers, I think then, I mean, when I pick up the phone and call 911, I really hope that person answering is healthy.
Yeah.
So if there's
Yeah.
some crazy things going on, that they can guide me into the right place to get the help that I need.
Hmm. You've just made a great connection. The way that our responders have survived going all the way back and still today often has been to really desensitize themselves, to try to shut off the parts of the heart because it's too painful to feel things. Allow yourself to keep feeling everything out there, and then you go home and then you carry that with you. The problem with shutting it off is that you become desensitized, and then when you're at home, your family's saying, where are you? We don't feel you. We don't feel the connection with you anymore. So it's the idea, what would the world be like if our 911 professionals had ultimate health? Where, you know what, here's part of the challenge, in my view, Conrad. The service overall that 911 delivers is outstanding. It's just that it's at the cost that's secret and unseen in the life of the very first responder. Their lives are taking the toll
Mm-hmm.
for the service with excellence they're giving when they don't have adequate support.
Mm-hmm.
And that really does require that we do change the federal recognition of telecommunicators as being emergency responders and not clerical people. It
Mm-hmm.
does require that the public and our legislature get behind, at the state, federal levels, get behind the need for the funding and for the education and the support that they need. And that's why that's why I jumped on board to say, yes, I'll do anything I can to help you with your movie.
Well, thank you for that. So, what would you say to those people? And I've actually heard this from people that who say that, well, dispatchers, they don't see it. They're not experiencing it on location. They're not there seeing the event unfold in front of them. They're
Mhm.
hearing it, or they're just responding to a call. What would you say to them?
Well, so here's the thing, you can see with your imagination. And when I ask dispatchers across the country, I've done this for years now. And the question is, and when I ask it, it's a rhetorical question. I let them know when I'm asking a question that's really kind of a trick, because I never want to be insulting. But how many of you guys visualize your callers? Well, all the hands go up, maybe one out of whomever. Then the question is, do you visualize the best or the worst of what you hear happening on scene? And it's almost always we visualize the worst. Well, then I say, why would you do that to yourself? Right? Well, what do you think the answer is? Right? We want to be prepared.
Hmm.
Okay, so the in order to be as invested and dedicated as they are and do the best job they can, they have to be thinking contingencies. What's happening? What might be happening? And if you're thinking, oh, it's no big deal, well, then you're not preparing. You're not thinking the right way. You're not asking the right questions, and you don't get the right data to help protect your field responders and get optimal care for the person on scene. Right? So what's best for the responders and best for the public is not good for the dispatcher because they're filling their minds with worst case scenarios all the time. So they have to be trained to be able to filter that, to be able to dump that along the way and do what we call reset their psychophysiology, which is a 7 syllable word.
So, what about closure?
Huh.
And
So interesting that you would say that. So I call this the big C of 911. This is one of the unique 911 stressors that we talk about. So, our responders could all say they lack closure. In other words, I don't feel like I was able to close the book and say, okay, I know what happened at the end, and I'm going to now slide that book aside and I'll pick up another one. For 911, there's less closure than any of the other responders, right? Because by virtue of where they're where they're at, I look at it this way. T1 is time period one, raw, uncensored, screaming through the phone, right? Field responders don't get that. Raw, uncensored, hot, and fresh, just like this, comes to the very first responder first. Now, we're not competing with or saying their stress is worse than our field responders. It's just different. Okay. T2, now, what are they doing? They're activating the responders. They're sharing information with the responders while they're also trying to help the person in real time. T3 is when the responder arrives on scene. Okay. Now they take over. And when they take over and the scene is stabilized, T4, boom, dispatcher's out, right? They don't know the rest of what's happened to that person. It may be stabilized in the sense that the responders on scene can handle it from there, but that doesn't mean we know whether the person lived or died,
mm-hmm.
and so much more. So closure is a major issue that I believe contributes to the risk of PTSD. However, again, all these things are manageable if we have the training that we need, the equipping that we need. You
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily have to know the ending. You have to acknowledge the distress and get the support that you need and be able to clear the visual debris from your mind. And for example, with EMDR, it's not just for PTSD. You can clear trauma as it happens even by the month. So you're not carrying that stuff inside.
Mm. Because all that trauma is cumulative.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah.
And how
Yeah.
much do you think that it's interesting in doing the research for this film project and talking to all these different agency types? I kind of get the same thing over and over again that this is cumulative, but also it can depend on what happened when you were a child
Yeah.
and the traumas that you experienced there and how you react now to those two situations that can impact, what your reaction is. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that that's supported by the evidence and the research. What we know about those who are most at risk of PTSD are those, in other words, on the job now, who is most apt to experience post traumatic stress disorder, as I defined it earlier at the job? Those who have a history of traumatic impacts in their life in the developmental years, right? Because what happens is that stuff has there's something there to be reactivated, to be triggered, to be associated with and connected with, and then it fires up. And so it's a powerful point you're making, because for a lot of our folks, they're not only dealing with the bad call that went south, that's in their brain, they're also now tying it together to things that have been unearthed and that they're also dealing with,
Hmm.
which
And
is
does
why it's essential that we get support, because it's ethically necessary to care effectively for them.
and do treatment modalities like EMDR, can that reach back to those childhood traumas as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, we have to qualify. EMDR can provide healing at really at warp speed, which is just phenomenal. In some other treatments that are newer, which don't have the evidence base that has yet. Having said that, the more trauma we've had growing up in childhood, the more time it takes to resolve those traumas. The cool thing, though, is that when you teach folks in an EMDR therapy process how to manage their distress during the process, but also manage the distress out there, you teach coping skills, safe place, you make the treatment process safe and manageable. What we find is that the traumas that we experience in life are often stacked up kind of in categories, and like dominoes in a good way. If you heal the first one or the worst one or the last one, some of the others collapse and resolve. So
Hmm.
it's very powerful for healing the stuff in the past
Hmm.
as well.
So let's say I'm a 21-year-old just decided to go into this business and I'm a few days away from my first taking my first live call.
Yeah.
What can I do to prepare myself? How can I
Mm.
manage my mental health in my career? What are some
Wow.
things I can start doing now?
Mm. So I'm gonna think with you. That's a great question, and we could say, you're 21-year-old right there. I can see that.
Of course. course.
Get that young heart, right? So
Exactly.
yeah,
Sometimes I feel 21 and my body thinks my brain thinks my body's 21, but
I'm with you, man. We've been going through a move. We moved from one part of Michigan to the next, and I've been like a week, 7 days in a row of just really moving on, hauling, unpacking.
feel your
Anyhow,
pain.
yeah, I'm feeling it right now. I'm feeling some of those 35 years of age I have now.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Everybody's like, right. So so you're the 21-year-old. What can you do to prepare yourself to be as safe and effective in managing your own health as possible as you enter the career? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's look at it in terms of 3 time zones. Acknowledge the past. That doesn't mean you have to dig into everything you ever experienced and go radically psychoanalytical. But if you know you've had trauma in your background, you need to get yourself into the EMDR or one of the other evidence-based treatments ASAP and resolve that stuff. Now, you need to do it in a way that you can stay stable and grounded and do your work and your employment. So if it was super severe, I'm not saying rip everything open and do it at breakneck pace, but you got to understand that which is not resolved, this is a job that's apt to wake it up and have you deal with it one way or the other. And so the question is, do you want to deal with it on your own terms now or deal with it when it's knocking you over the head later on? And that's if there's, the trauma in your history. So then the other thing is acknowledge uh, acknowledge what your strengths are, what your areas of needed growth are in terms of your ability to communicate with other people, to acknowledge fear, to ask for help when you need it. And you need to ask for help when you need it. Do not go to that job acting like, I got this, I got this. You're going to wash out if you do that. Doesn't matter how high your IQ is. Now one is filled with brilliant people. But the ones who survive are not only smart, they know to ask for help from their trainers. So you've got to ask for help, both technically to do the job well, because it's complex, and to ask for help right away from peers for emotional care, and to get into the employee assistance program early to talk about fear of performance failure, anxiety on the job. Uh,
You,
yeah,
I think self care has kind of become the new buzzword in a lot of communities, but I think it's so important. I mean, for all of us, even for me as an entrepreneur, as a filmmaker, as a podcast host, for
yes,
me first to think about it seems selfish that, okay, I need to think about me first.
right.
But if I'm not taking care of me first, I can't take care of the people that depend on me.
Well, it's huge, and here's the thing. I try not to say obvious things to smart people because that's an insult. Okay. And that's supposed to be a little funny, but it happens. I don't, in my classes, I don't say, and not to disparage your point whatsoever. You're right on the money. But what I don't say is, you need to get good sleep, you need to have a good nutritional diet, and you need to exercise. I mean, it's like everyone knows that.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is, one of the biggest challenges is, but I have so much responsibility. There's no time for me. And I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. So we keep pushing on. The personality, there are many different personality types, but the inclination of most of our responders is, and I have to confess, as a trauma therapist, I came from the same stock in my family as my sister, and that is, I'm more inclined to be looking for who else needs their respirator put on, their oxygen mask now. I'm more apt to be running out to take care of everyone. Big surprise, right? I'm a therapist. Um, and for those of you who are like that, and leaders too who are watching right now, right? The deal is, you're going to keep telling yourself, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, until you're not good and it catches up with you. There has to be a fundamental commitment with some accountability and support from someone you respect and, if not love, a close friend, coworker, um, who will come alongside you. And you need to prioritize not a bunch of goals, but what do I need to do in my self-care? And that does come down to those fundamental things of the physical well-being, but it also comes down to, again, a big part of self-care is the peer support. So yeah, you've got to have a commitment as you enter this profession to practicing self-care physically, emotionally, spiritually, and health in your relationships.
Mm-hmm. And not only for those entering the profession, but for those in the profession and in the middle of it. That's if you're not on a program or not on some kind of a self care regimen, you need to get there
Right.
yesterday
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
make it a priority.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
or
will
that
say
or
that
that longevity is going to get shorter and shorter.
demand resources, demand resources. We got the blinking light of caution. I just will say though that to your point, there is the belief that it's selfish or that I just can't. I just can't do it. And I just want to respect that when you've been a caregiver your whole life, it really is hard to make that decision to do it. But I just want to encourage you that those of you out there you've done a lot of hard things and you didn't do all of them because you felt it was easy. You did it because it was right. We have to invest the same in ourselves we've invested in other people. And sometimes our self-worth has taken a hit in life and we don't think we deserve it. And we could go deep on that, but that's another story. But that's a therapy issue. If I am repeatedly not doing my self-care, I need to at least took us into a clinician to talk about what's up with me. I'm kind of self-defeating without judgment, with
Mm.
self-compassion, but with commitment to doing it.
Well, this has been an amazing. I mean, I can't believe it's already been almost an hour since we've been on here. It's been an amazing conversation. We're talking with Jim Marshall with the 911 Training Institute and talking specifically about 911 dispatch. But I think some of these principles are good for all of us, that we all can need to be able to take care of ourselves so that whoever we're responsible for, that we can be healthy and to live a life that is meaningful, full of purpose, and accomplish the things that we are designed to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim, how can people get in touch with you or your organization? What's the best way to do that?
Sure. So the organization, kind of for the introduction, just go to the website to nowonetraining.net. And then welcome you to email me personally if it's something where you want to tap into some of the uh, the experience that I've had with 911, and I just offer gratitude to 911 for entrusting me in that way. If this is something personal you want to contact me about, then by all means, Jim at 911training.net. Please email me directly. And then for information about training or about the work that we do in 911, to get more information as an agency or organization, you can go info at 911training.net, info at 911training.net, because Deborah Gagnon, my outreach director, she's the one that handles all that. I mess it up. So, and yeah, so that'd be how. And then, of course, we are on LinkedIn, and thanks to Ryan Dedman, LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those nice places.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we will be sure to post those links in the comments after the show so people can access them directly. And if you're watching this and you missed part of it, it'll be on replay on Facebook and on YouTube as well. You can access it there anytime. And if you found this conversation helpful, please share it with your network. Let them know about it. Let them you send them a link to it so that other people can benefit from it as well. Jim, I want to say thank you so much for being on the program today and for
Hmm.
being willing to talk about these things. And sometimes these things aren't the easiest thing to talk about. And so I really appreciate that and appreciate what you are doing for the film project and for the community, the 911 dispatch community as a whole.
It's a privilege, Conrad, and I'm glad you are now also part of that now community. And by the way, watch out, it's a lobster trap. Once you get in, you can't get back out. You just love these people and and they love you. So thank you for what you're doing. I'm looking forward to cheering you on and supporting you in this project. Uh, you've got great people around you. Thank you
Well,
for
I
the
really
privilege.
appreciate it. I want to give everybody just a little heads up on what's coming up in our future programming. I'm going to share my screen here again to see if I can make this thing work. Um,
Hmm.
let's see here. Here we go. This thing is, I don't know if that's showing up to you in a weird way, but next week we have Diane Bernhard on. She's going to be with us on June 19th. Diane is the executive director of the Concerns of Police Survivors, and they're doing amazing work with our law enforcement community around the country and helping families of survivors of law enforcement officers who have lost their life in one way or another. And so Diane's going to be on to talk about that. And then coming up on June 26th, Karen Solomon, the co-founder and president of Blue Help, will be on, and we'll be talking to her about law enforcement, families, and wellness. So please join us for these programs. We are trying to come to you as many Fridays as we can to bring these programs, and we will probably miss some, but we'll be here as often as possible. And again today, Jim Marshall has been with us and joining us from his new home there in Michigan, right?
That's right.
And Jim, again, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who watched and participated with us, thank you for being here and for watching this and for participating. This has been a great First Responder Friday, and I'm excited to do this program. And it's a privilege for me to bring these folks to you to share their stories and to share the resources and information that they can offer to all of our first responder community. And if you're a first responder, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing,
Mhm.
for making the sacrifice that you do on a daily basis out there to help our communities and make our communities a better place to live. So, again, my name is Conrad Weaver. And if you haven't liked the Facebook page, please do so and share it with your network. I would really appreciate it. Thank you much, and we'll see you again next Friday on First Responder Friday.